Kirby, Kirby, Kirby. That's the name we all know. But for Nintendo Switch owners, they might not know that name well enough. Despite his popularity, the pink buff ball has only had 2 games released on the system so far, which is, God, compared to what he had on the 3DS, it was like 10, 20. It was an insane amount. There was a new Kirby game coming out every 6 months, it felt like. But even with that, one of the games on the Switch is just an updated 3DS game. The only new game, Kirby Star Allies, was a fun, but not necessarily revolutionary or largely spectacular, mainline entry into the series. But with that one's lukewarm reception, the lack of solid Kirby games means this is the perfect time for the return of the Epic Yarn series. And I call it a series. There was only one game and a port, but the Epic Yarn title. Epic Yarn is one of the most inventive and fun entries in the multitude of Kirby games, and one that almost only ever receives praise, and very high praise at that. As for my thoughts, well, Epic Yarn is easily my favorite Kirby game, one of my favorite Wii games in general. Heck, I love the game so much that I want Yarn Kirby as a DLC Smash Ultimate Fighter. Before I dive deep into what an Epic Yarn sequel could and should look like, I want to give some history on Kirby's Epic Yarn to explain why we need a sequel, why now's a good time for that sequel. Kirby's Epic Yarn was developed by Goodfeel, and while they're now fairly well known for working with Nintendo, this was only their 3rd collaboration at the time. However, with how good Wario Land Shake It was, it's a great game, but it showed how Goodfeel was able to take an already established Nintendo character and make a fun but different styled game out of it. After that, it's no wonder they were brought on for more projects. Epic Yarn actually started just from the idea of a world made of yarn, and so the developers bought some cloth and yarn from a store to get more ideas, just played with it, and see what they could do. Once work actually began on the game, it wasn't as a Kirby game. It was supposed to be its own idea called Kaito no Fluff, or Fluff of Yarn, with Prince Fluff as the main character. Later, though, Nintendo approached Goodfeel to make it a Kirby game. Prince Fluff managed to stay in the game as a side character, or as player 2 in co-op, but Kirby was brought in as the star of the show. After he was brought in, more than 3 months were spent perfecting his new design, his character movements, and just the polish and care really shows in the game. It's interesting because you don't think about Kirby's movement options and his design in the regular games because it's the same. It's basically been the same since, Dreamland on the Game Boy. But with here, they had to change it so drastically that it's something you notice right off the bat, how he, turns into a car instead of just running, how he jumps and, he can double jump and float down as a parachute. It really takes advantage of the different it takes advantage of the different style the yarn allows, and so that was one thing the development team really wanted to perfect. Once the game actually released, it was hugely acclaimed for tons of reasons, but especially was the overflowing creativity and fun the game held, especially as an accessible game. There's no, it's Kirby games, but there's no lives, even like other Kirby games, there's no lives. If you die, quote unquote, you just get put back and you lose some of your beads, which are the currency. So it's a very accessible, fun, and creative game, and because of the lack of emphasis on danger in the game, it allowed for more of an emphasis on just exploring the creativity of this new world and the bright new climates that you could explore. But once it was released into huge acclaim, nothing really happened with it. It's kind of surprising. Nintendo really does like to, when they hit gold, they keep things moving, but it seemed like this was just going to be falling to the wayside with other great games like Kirby Air Ride, one-and-done legends, because other than big assemblages like Smash Bros., it didn't get referenced. Yet when the 3DS refused to die in 2019, Nintendo decided to port Epic Yarn onto the 3DS. Was it bringing it back for a new life, or was it just going to be the curse that put Epic Yarn in its true grave? While it may have seemed like the port to the 3DS would be great, it actually may have done more harm to the game than you might think. First of all, why would you make an enhanced port for a system inferior to the game's original console? You look at the Luigi's Mansion remake, quote-unquote remake, from the GameCube to the 3DS and how much they had to scale that down. Why would you think a Wii game was capable of being better on there? Especially when you had the beauty of the Switch already out. 2 years it had been out by then. I would have killed for a Switch Epic Yarn port. In fact, I might still kill for an Epic Yarn port. But not only did the graphics take a hit, the game's biggest claim to fame and biggest selling point, but the new additions kind of hurt the original spirit. Power-ups were added to the game to make it feel more like a traditional Kirby, but the whole point of changing Kirby in the original game which said he played differently. You couldn't suck enemies in anymore, so you couldn't get power-ups. That was, a core part of the game. But add on to the fact that the levels and the enemies weren't balanced to accommodate for these new power-ups, it makes this generally just an inferior version of the game to play. There were 3 new modes added, but one was just a hard mode that gives you a life counter, which seems cool, but then there's this pesky little, devil thing flying at you all the time, which ruins the flow of the game, so that sucks. And the other 2 were just simple mini-games that didn't have a strong identity, and, mini-games are a dime a dozen in Kirby. If you don't have a strong identity, you're going in the Kirby bargain bin, essentially. It received generally positive reviews, but ones that were still lower than the originals. This ended up being the case with its sales. They were already dwindling on the 3DS. So yeah, Extra Epic Yarn, which was the 3DS game, is not, it's not as good as the original because there were so many factors going against it. And so the series deserves better than this to be its final outing. And it's clear that the series still has a market, especially when you look at what Goodfield would work on next. Just a few years after Epic Yarn, work on Yoshi's Woolly World started. Try saying that 5 times fast. And it was a spiritual successor to Kirby's Epic Yarn, but it used wool instead of yarn and the Yoshi franchise in place of Kirby. Once it was released, it was the second verse, same as the first, with the game being loved by fans and critics alike, the praise focusing largely on the charm the world exuded and the fun gameplay it entailed. The game sold well, and it also ended up with a generally inferior 3DS port. Yet this game actually got a sequel, Yoshi's Crafted World, which was also well-received and financially successful, even if slightly less so. The game's style continued to be praised, especially how it continued to grow the style of the trilogy throughout the games. But the music was generally the target of criticism in Crafted World. And I'm not going to say it's undeserved. Looking at all these games together shows that there hasn't been a drop in quality or demand for this style, at least not a major one, and clearly the point of diminishing returns has not yet been reached. But with the slowing praise in regards to the Yoshi's entries, maybe it's time for Nintendo and Goodfield to return to the entry that kicked this all off. Finally, there's one big reason Nintendo should make a sequel to Epic Yarn now, and that's the rut the Kirby series has fallen into. And don't take this as me hating the Kirby series. I love the games, they're fun, they're, a nice, enjoyable time without having to stress yourself out too much. But since Epic Yarn's released 10 years ago, no Kirby games reached the same review scores, or many haven't gotten as close to the financial success, with most recent games falling below Epic Yarn's 1.5 million sales. Although Kirby Star Allies did sell 2.56 million copies, and it shows that there is an incredibly definitive market for Kirby on the Switch. There's untapped potential to shake up this regular formula and give the series the adrenaline shot it so desperately needs after so many years of similar feeling games. In fact, if you look at most complaints with Kirby Star Allies and some of the more modern games, other than now with Kirby Star Allies, all the DLC it's gotten, a big problem is people just saying these games feel too similar there too. It becomes like Pokemon, where you just expect a new one each year, but where Pokemon has the addition of new creatures to catch and collect, or remakes of classic games to experience again, relive the nostalgia. Kirby games are Kirby games, man. It's hard to experiment a ton when you're not doing something like this or Canvas Curse, something crazy stylistically changing it. Honestly, I would be surprised if there wasn't something in the works like this behind the scenes at Nintendo, since Star Allies was the latest game in 2017. And with Paper Mario getting a new entry coming this July, it would help create some stylistic synchronicities to get more sales between the two games. Although, I've talked enough about why there should be new entries into the Epic Yarn series. I hope you can see my case. Nintendo, if you're watching, hit me up, man. But what could those entries entail? Well, I'm glad you asked. Easily the most important thing that would need to be done would be to keep the original style intact, especially after the problems seen with Extra Epic Yarn. Mainly the graphical stylings that, would look beautiful on Switch, but were super compressed in the 3DS. But seeing as how the Switch can handle Yoshi's Crafted World and how good it looks there, the console's capability clearly isn't the problem. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Epic Yarn on Switch would probably be the best looking game on the system. However, there's going to be more needed than to just bring the style to Switch, but I'm positive Goodfield would be able to up the ante. I don't think the needed updates would have to be as drastic of a change as Yoshi's Woolly World to Crafted World, how it changed the wool art style to more of a general arts and crafts, creative art style. I think it could focus on just improving the sewn together and stylishly integrated feel of the original, just escalating that to a larger level, possibly having some more complex weave together things, as opposed to how, a lot of the things were just one or two yarn lines. So I think that could create a good contrast, especially with kind of how it did in the original, where the bosses and the more important characters would have the more elaborate details. But the sequel would also really have to have a chance to tackle entirely different locales, because the original did a great job with the normal grass, water, fire, desert, snow, and space areas that you see in a lot of games, especially a lot of Kirby games. But a focus onto different worlds, like in the original, Treatland had multiple concepts of food and music. That would be the best thing to do. And, some personal things that I would love to see in this new yarn style would be cities. We didn't really get many of those in Epic Yarn. Swamps, because, swamps are just freaking cool, man. Like crocodiles, alligators, those dudes, marshes, Swamp Thing. A wasteland. Kirby games do like to have some post-apocalyptic teasing, so that could be a fun one. And potentially seeing some old locales that have become yarnified, like Dreamland in the original. Seeing something like that could be a really fun addition. Good to hit in some fan service. Could be fun if they needed to fill a couple extra spaces. They could do it with the plot. Maybe the yarn is seeping out, and that's what has to happen. But it's, there's so much you could do there. There's so much that even if you just want to go back to the traditional things, you can do like what Mario Galaxy did and combine the fire and the ice. You can just switch things up enough that it's not the same as the original. Because the original, it perfectly nails every single, like the fire world has both fire, volcano, that type, but it also has desert levels. They managed to hit the nail on the head like really well in those traditional levels. So I think with the sequel here, you would, this is already a very experimental series. It's Kirby made out of yarn. So I think you really use this chance to experiment with the worlds and maybe do something like they had in New Super Mario Bros. Wii U, I think it was, like the painting world where, it was just gorgeous, Get weird with it, Start branching out instead of just doing regular traditional environments. Go crazy. This is what people want to see. And by allowing the creative team to be more creative with what they get to develop in the worlds, that's gonna help this game flourish and, bring the success that the original Epic Yarn had just from the creative basis it had alone. An aspect of the original Epic Yarn that I don't see people give nearly enough credit to the game for is how it managed to perfectly keep the tone of a Kirby game, despite the drastic changes made to the gameplay. And honestly, that's one thing that the team will not have to really focus on and change much for if they were to make a sequel. They perfectly nailed it in that original game. It's what Kirby would be if he got sent into Yarn, not just him, but his enemies. And so they really, they don't have to change anything there, just touch up things so it looks nicer, probably, upscaled from Wii to Switch. But I'm actually going to have to give extra Epic Yarn credit about two things that could be done much better in a sequel, and those are the addition of power-ups and mini-games. But hear me out, because the way they brought it in was not good. It's definitely going to have to change when it's brought back. The power-ups should be treated more like the yarn transformations from the original, where for certain levels or sections of levels, Kirby's would be able to be changed into something to switch up gameplay, like a UFO, a truck, or a surfing penguin. Those common surfing penguins. But by introducing the power-ups only in certain controlled areas, it'll allow them to be better balanced so they don't break the game as much as they did in the original. It would help them serve a better purpose. It could also bridge the gap because on Switch, you're going to have a lot of people who are, casual Kirby fans, or they've only played Star Allies, so they want, the familiarity with this. And so by doing that, you can give that a little bit, but you can also make a lot more situational power-ups. You can make them a lot weirder and more fun because you do that. Maybe you even can mix power-ups with the yarn transformations. That could be a cool thing to do. But it's better to have them in isolated sections so you know how to work around them rather than just having them anywhere, because then they're not, then it takes away from the fun of just being Yarn Kirby in his unique style. It takes away that from the original game. So yeah, I think they'd have to be tweaked a little bit still because they're really powerful and extras Epic Yarn. But the basis to fix those and introduce the new ones could be really fun. Same case with the transformations. Those definitely have to come back because they're such a fun and unique part of it. And they could lead to improved returns for past transformations, and they could lead to fun new ideas being brought in as well. Minigames were the other thing Extra Epic Yarn had a good idea for, but lackluster execution in. They weren't bad, I mean, they were just pretty vanilla, they weren't special. And with how creative the base game is, you'd expect the minigames to be very unique as well. That's where this sequel could definitely shine. While I don't have any full idea on what they could add, a fun idea would be to yarnify old minigame styles such as seen in Superstar, and just see how things would change with that, either with the graphic style changing or the characters being changed from yarn or from regular to yarn versions. Maybe adding a rushing minigame with the constant transformation power-up switching could also be really fun, because that'd give you a nice, see how far you can get, see how many points you can get, and just it'd be a sweet, fun, almost stress relieving with how cathartic it could be type of minigame. As I said earlier, the gameplay with Epic Yarn was already basically perfect, so a lot of the fun wouldn't be from having to change the gameplay or add new styles to that. It would more be putting that gameplay into new levels and seeing the new things, the new obstacles to get around. Yet after Star Allies, I think the addition of other Yarn characters being playable would be a fun but optional spice. Granted, nowhere near as many characters as Star Allies have. That's a great thing. It's very fun experimenting with all of them, but I think we're going to have to cut back to 4 for Epic Yarn. Extra Epic Yarn had a Yarn Meta Knight and Yarn DDD, but they were only in the mini-games, not the base game, so it wasn't amazing. But if you keep Kirby's style the same, you could alter Meta Knight and King DDD to better fit in with the Yarn world for 2 more characters to play, and bring back a returning Prince Fluff, who alter him to play slightly different, slightly different to Kirby, but still similar enough, make Fluff the Luigi to Kirby's Mario, and, add that in, and you hit the 4-player co-op that Kirby games love so much with, a ton of great options. And even if you wanted to, you can make it so that you don't always just play Kirby in the main story. Maybe you switch throughout the characters, or it's like Super Mario 3D World where you could choose any of the characters. Something fun like that. But that would give you 4 play styles, 2 of which are similar, because it's good to have that good baseline, and then 2 which could be, more unique, DDD and Meta Knight, and maybe, Kirby and Fluff are the easy mode, King DDD is the medium, and Meta Knight's the hard mode, something like that, Just experimenting with the different playstyles could be fun, because I don't think you need to change Kirby's much. You can change Fluff so you have a little bit more variety. But then, you go wild with DDD and Meta Knight, so that would make things really fun. Lastly, we get to the most important part in all Kirby games that the Epic Yarn sequel would have to deliver on heavily, and that's the story. I'm just kidding. As long as the game ends with a boss fight against some eldritch yarn barmination, things are going to be alright. In reality, the game's story could have Kirby visiting Prince Fluff and something going wrong then, or maybe you have Yin Yarn come back and cause more chaos, or, as I said earlier, yarn starts seeping out from Prince Fluff's world into Dreamland. It's not going to be... Kirby is no Citizen Kane. It's fun. The real biggest challenge with the sequel would just be improving on the score of the original, which is heavily, and really, I don't think you can beat the original score. It's so good. You got tense songs, you got fun songs, you got tragic, and a lot of it is just really calming. So I really don't think you could beat the original score, but I'm sure they could come pretty dang close to that greatness. And there it is, my ideas / open letter pleading for Nintendo to make a new game in the Kirby's Epic Yarn style, and why I think we need it. Ideally, it would be called Kirby's Supremely Epic Yarn, but something tells me that might not happen. I know it's a long shot for this to be true, but I feel like there's it's not completely wrong. It's not like asking for, Mother 3 to be localized, or a new F-Zero game, or a new, Star Fox game that it has a separate identity from Star Fox 64. Something crazy like that. And those aren't going to happen. Or, a really good Pokemon game that has, a strong core identity without relying on nostalgia. Those things don't happen. But this one could happen. I really do feel like it. There's a clear market for this to be true on Switch. And, God, I just hope it's true. It would make me so happy if they released a new entry. Kirby Star Allies on Switch is one of the most successful Kirby games in the series. So I'd just be foolish not to get this series moving again, People are upset with how Kirby's lagging, and it's, been a couple years since the last game. You throw this in, throw a sequel to a beloved series, you're cooking with gas right there. So, if you haven't played the series, I highly recommend it. Namely, I would say on the Wii, but if you only have access to the 3DS, go out and buy a Wii and copy of Kirby's Epic Yarn, because there's enough good games on the Wii to justify that purchase. But in truth, it's better to at least play Extra Epic Yarn. Better to play the inferior version than just miss out on such a great game. Just, avoid the bad stuff. Try not to get, like, the power-up things. Yeah, the original is the best version of it, though. So, thank you all for watching, and hit this video with a like if you also want a new Epic Yarn style game. Let me know in the comments what you would want to see in an Epic Yarn sequel, what you think would be cool to have there. And for more content like this in the future, hit subscribe. Thank you so much, and until next time, goodbye.